I was trying to translate the saying in Afrikaans of your tone krul. Your toes are almost said curling, right? But it is one of those sessions, right, where we started the day with introspection and really self-awareness in the space, and moved on to the landscape that we are operating in, and then to the movements. What a wonderful thing a movement is. That little book on the spider and the starfish it really blew my mind in terms of just understanding how powerful a movement is and how good it is to be involved together in a movement. So this session, I'm just going to give a bit of a common sense background to collective capital, and then we're going to have some really smart guys give more detailed elements of it. Collective capital, in 2016, we had the privilege of having the Christian Economic Forum in South Africa. Why they picked Durban, I'm not sure, but it was there. Because of you, probably. I wrote a little white paper on collective capital, and it started with a sentence that we've used for a long time at Tree of Life, and that is to say that capital always has an agenda. Whether that is by design or by default, whether it's explicit or subtle, positive or negative, when you apply capital, it drives a certain agenda. And the question is whether you're going to decide what the agenda is yourself, or whether you're going to allow the world to decide what that agenda is. Now, because we really believe this, and because we also believe that our calling is to make sure that whatever capital we gain influence over, we have to change that agenda to Christ. We try to think about capital a lot, and we try to think about the application of capital a lot. And try to think, what do we have in our hand that we can leverage? And I think that's a question for all of us, right? What do we have in terms of resources? What do we have in terms of skills? What do we have in terms of influence? What do we have in terms of relationships that we can leverage to drive that agenda collectively? So I'm going to touch on three things really quick. The first one is the condition of our hearts in the context of capital. I think that has been covered really well so far, so I don't want to go into that too much detail. The second is to just talk about the attractiveness of collective capital. And then thirdly, if time allows, I'm going to quickly tell you about donor-advised funds, because that's something I believe can be really big in South Africa. It's big overseas, and we have only started to see it happening here. We're doing a little bit in that space, and I want to tell you about that. For the first three slides, I've just borrowed from a friend of mine, Pete Oakes, which Henry and all of them will know really well. Pete lives in Kansas. He's a brilliant businessman. He also runs Enterprise Stewardship, which is a bit of a think tank. And he thinks in 3 bullets. So everything has 3 bullets, and then underneath those 3 bullets, every one of those bullets have 3 sub-bullets. And he says, well, the world will define you in terms of this. The world will define you in terms of who I am. I am the founder of this, or I'm the CEO of that, or I'm the chief investment officer of this. They will define you in terms of what I own. Okay, so you are the guy with the nice house on the hill, or with the yacht, or the aeroplane, or whatever, and how I live. So first one has to do with pride, second one has to do with possessions, and third one has to do with pleasure. And if me is in the middle of that, then that will show in the way that you apply those. So Pete says, obviously, what we know in Galatians, it's not me that live, that Christ that lives through me. God is supposed to be in the middle, right? And then your focus shifts from those 3 things to serving people, stewarding resources, and pursuing excellence. And all of those things have come out today already, right? I mean, it's very basic stuff, but very important stuff. So on this question of the bottom left-hand side, stewarding capital, his sub 3 bullets on that is, probably don't see it that well, but it's perspective, integrity, and generosity. You need the perspective to know what the role of capital is. You need the integrity in managing it and the generosity. And then he defines the 3 pools of capital: spiritual, social and economic capital. So we are in this position to steward that. And let me just say this as well. I think poverty is probably a lack of resources, right? Wealth is having enough resources. Then we can say that capital is having an excess. And the thing to do with what you have an excess of is to say, how do I invest it to the benefit of the kingdom and to the benefit of others? So a Bible teacher does that, right? A Bible teacher has an excess of spiritual capital or knowledge about the Bible. She can keep it to herself and make copious notes about it and file it in a cabinet, or say, I have an excess of knowledge about the Bible, I'm going to share it. At that point, it becomes an investment in the kingdom and in other people, and it becomes a form of collective capital. And that, I think, is a notion and the way in which we should think about it. So let's stop there with this first point in just saying the perspective of capital, where it fits in, with all the stuff that we've spoken about already today, the absence of ownership and the presence of stewardship, the awareness of what you have in excess. Where are you more than wealthy? Where do you have excess on spiritual, social, and economic capital? And then the intentionality of investing that. So, in terms of collective capital, the very big benefit, the very obvious and wonderful thing about putting capital together is the compounding effect that you achieve, right? I mean, there's just a wonderful compounding effect in that. Universities do that. They bring a lot of bright minds together and people share knowledge and they generate more knowledge in the process. So everyone could have done it on their own, but by coming together, there's an explosion of knowledge. A church does that in terms of spiritual capital. You've got one with worship ability, one with teaching ability coming together, and there's an explosion of that. So we can typically, I think it's safe to say, we can typically do better by putting capital together and getting that compounding effect. Now, at the beginning I said capital always has an agenda. Obviously, the size of the agenda that you can drive relates to the pool of capital that you have. As an individual, you're never going to be able to drive the same level of an agenda than you would in a collective fashion. Sure, some people are more resourceful and they can drive bigger agendas, but it will never be quite at that level. I started life as a pharmacist, so the first time I was confronted with collective capital and the beauty thereof was in health insurance. To realize that people can pool together to spread the risk that they have of a major catastrophic health event that is really expensive, that they wouldn't be able to afford. But by coming together in a health plan, they could collectively share that. Life insurance is, of course, the same. In fact, the more I thought about it at the time, I thought this is just like Acts 4 in the Bible, right? Where everyone brings some money to the apostles and they distribute it to whoever needs it. So insurance must be the most godly business on this planet, right? So everyone seemingly pays, hopefully, an affordable premium, and then the insurer turns around and makes a big, fat, lumpy payment to the family who lost their breadwinner. I don't think I'll call actuaries apostles just yet, although some of them may be. But I'll definitely say that insurance must be automated acts in some way, as long as you can keep greed out of the system. You cannot really build an airport as an investor, not as a typical investor, but investors can come together in an infrastructure fund and they can pool their money together and they can build an airport. That way also unleashing the creativity and the ability of a property developer that would otherwise not have been able to do it. So collective capital, I believe, is the way to go in terms of driving bigger agendas. And what are the two things that are needed in order for capital to come together? Well, at least you must have a shared culture and a shared focus, right? So you must have the same values in terms of what the people putting together the capital. Now, we must have an incredible benefit as Christians in this area. I mean, there's more than 2,000 verses in the Bible on money. We're supposed to have at least an alignment of some sorts in terms of the role that we think when we talk financial capital as to what that should do, right? And I often am perplexed about the lack in which, or our inability to utilize that, and often also perplexed at how religions that are rules-based and built on compliance often does better in terms of this area, because people know exactly what they're supposed to do with their money in order to comply in a rules-based religion, and they tick those boxes religiously, and they give what they're supposed to give. Whilst we live in a grace environment where we've received abundant grace, we've received full redemption, and sure, we don't have a compliance burden, but we have the opportunity to give abundantly. So we should have an incredible benefit in terms of values when we're pooling capital. And I think it will help if we have also, it's a general rule of thumb, not a spiritual one, but if we have focus in investment areas so that people know that I'm rallying behind this agricultural technology fund, or behind this property development fund, or this one that wants to cover Africa, and this one that wants to focus on South Africa. You know, that would facilitate it. Investments are better unlocked by statements like always and never, that compared to most of the time and sometime. So I think we can do better in that area as well. I've rushed through this a little bit because I really want to just say a few things about donor-advised funds. We're going to have on the panel people that are really very experienced and knowledgeable also in the private capital sector, whether that's in publicly listed entities or private equity. But there's a subclass of capital which is donor capital, where you're bringing together donor capital to really build the kingdom of God. And I just want to talk about that a little bit. In the US, this is $100 billion US dollar industry, donor advised funds. And I want to explain to you briefly how it works. You need at least three things to make a donor advised fund work. You need clients, you need investment options, and you need charities to give to. The way that you open, and you need a non-profit entity. So the way that you open a donor advised fund is like you would make a deposit with a bank. You're actually donating money into this bank, which is then a charity. So you're putting money into a charity by making a donation. And with that, you're opening your own DAF, your own donor advised fund. Now, in this process, this in South Africa is fairly new. We've done it for about 3 or 4 years. But the beauty of this is we could structure this in a way as well where someone from the US can open a donor advised fund. And we have a few US clients, privileged to have Henry as a client as well, where you can, through the structure, then invest and and open a donor advised fund. Now, what do you give up when you open a donor advised fund? You give up ownership, literally. You can never get it back. You and your family cannot benefit from it. What do you retain? You retain two things. One is the ability to decide how it's invested, and secondly, the ability to decide how it's distributed. To what charities, how much, when. 10% tomorrow, 100% next year, 10% per year, every year, whatever you want to do. That money is still on the distribution side for you to decide. What I love about this is that let me just say first, on the investment side, you can then give investment options to a donor advised fund client. So let's say they know they want to give the money away this year. It wouldn't make sense to take a lot of risk on it. Put it in a money market fund. And then you know what charity you want to give it to. So you nominate the charity and it goes to that charity. The beauty is you can add all these people on the top. And if you have thousands and you have like NCF in the US, $3 billion US on their platform, those people can come together and invest in certain investments that they can do collectively and may not have been able to do on their own. So that's why you can have collective investments, your typical mutual funds, you have private equity, and you have impact investments. And this gives us great joy because in our case, actually, we unitize these portfolios. So you take a private equity and you break it up in whatever, 100 units, the donor advised fund clients buy units in that portfolio. What does this do? It creates liquidity in an illiquid asset. So typically, if you make a private equity investment, that's going to be a 5 to 7 year investment, right? And most of the clients will stay in there for 5 to 7 years, but if for some reason they want to get out of that portfolio, another DAF client wants to get into the portfolio, there's a little market there and the transaction happens and it creates liquidity. And of course, you can add as many charities as you want. That's just, we do the basic vetting in terms of whether it's a registered public benefit organization. When I look at this, I see an investment bank, right? There's a bit of regulatory arbitrage here in that you're not a deposit-taking institution for those that work in the financial services arena. So you actually don't have all the compliance burden that you have as a bank with Basel and everything that goes with it. So this is a fantastic tool, I believe, and something that I think we can utilize way better. If you have a couple of billion sitting in this type of environment and you have all these different investments that you can spread it over. In the mainstream financial services in South Africa, this is called a LISP, a link insurance service provider. So you do it you do this already with your private capital. You have a pension fund and underneath it you have a lot of investments and you can switch between those. So this is just the donor capital version of this. So now I've done so well in rushing through this that I actually have 3 minutes and 22 seconds, but I think we can use that well. Jason.
Can I say one more thing that I think you jumped over, and that is you don't have to donate cash, you can donate equity. That's the real power of this.
Thank you for that. This is a man that's experienced that I met last night for the first time, Jason, and he's over in Romania, he's over in Ethiopia, he's all over the place with great ventures and understands and have used the donor advised fund concept. So where he's spot on, and thanks for reminding me of that, is that you can actually put any asset into a donor advised fund. You can say, I want to put 10% of my company in there. I want to put this building in there. And that makes it so much better. You know, so we've seen two users, while I still have time, I may as well tell you. We have two users lately that is just so great. The one is people with appreciated stock. So let's say you're one of the founders of Capitec, and you got your shares at 5 Rand a share, and now they're worth north of 1,000 Rand a share, and you want to sell some of those shares and give the money to charity. Well, you're going to sell it for, let's round it off, you're going to sell it for 1,000 Rand, but then you're going to pay significant capital gains on that. So what will be available to the charity is not 1,000 Rand. But you can open a donor advised fund with that. And you can donate the shares into the donor advised fund. Because this is a tax-free entity, it's a public benefit organization, if you then sell those shares out of your donor advised fund, there's no tax. And then the full amount is available for you to distribute it. And people have learned that, you know, it's not wise to sell your business and then give the money away. It's better to give 10% of your shares, if that's your number, into a donor advised fund of your existing business. And then when you sell it, the money there's no capital gains on it, and it's available for distribution. The other thing that we've seen is that people like to use this in their estate planning. So they know they don't want to give all the money to their children. And if their number is 30% they don't want to give to their children, then they can write that into their will and put 30% in a donor advised fund and stipulate who's the advisor on the donor advised fund after they've passed away. And that gives a very elegant structure, you know, for the future. Great, Darren.
Yeah, is there any, I know this is a lot of, right? It's spent there any tax incentive for the cash? Like, do you issue a Section 18A or anything like that?
That is the...
Then that bypasses the person just going straight to the charity? Or can they
Yeah.
achieve the same?
Yes, they can achieve the same. It's a little bit of a long answer, so I'll try and keep it short. But if the donor advised fund client knows that they definitely want to only support 18A charities, then you can give them an 18A when they come into the donor advised fund. But many of our clients say, look, I don't know what God's going to tell me. And it may be something that's explicitly evangelic and won't get an 18A, so I'll rather not take the tax deduction coming in on the top. I'm hoping and believing that we'll be able to convince government to change the legislation, allow for donor advised funds in the South African tax regime, and then give you a full deduction for that. If they could get their heads around the 12J, there's no reason why they cannot give you a tax deduction for a donor advised fund. I think the time is almost ripe to engage with them on that. And it may be that one needs to have a quid pro quo where they say, well, then I expect every DAF client to invest at least 30% in private equity in South Africa. Well, so be it. Then you can at least know under what conditions you can get a full tax deduction. But we do provide for people that go 18A, I know I'm going to give it to 18A. They take it on top and they have a limitation on the distribution at the bottom.